Hi, I'm Shannon from houseimprovements.com, and I'm here to show you in this video my favorite ways for cutting vinyl siding. So basically I've got a few different ways, and I don't think they're any secret to anybody of how to cut vinyl siding. The simplest of all is just with a pair of Aviation Snips. You honestly, if that's all you had, you really could side your house or your garage or whatever. If that's all you had, you could make it work for sure. So that's kind of the simplest thing you can have. Also, a grinder will work quite well, and I like to use basically a concrete blade. It's a solid rim concrete blade, and I find that actually makes about the best cuts without actually melting the plastic. It actually cuts it. I have used like cut-off wheels, that sort of thing, so they do work, but they tend to melt more than they cut, but they will do the job. Circular saw, with the use also of this guide here, easily works. I always put the blade in backwards, so I'll use like about, I think this is like a 40 tooth blade, and I've just got it in backwards, so when it's turning, it's actually spinning this way, and it doesn't grab as bad with the blade in backwards. Okay, and one of the other things that I use, and I'll demonstrate first, is a miter saw. Now, preferably, I actually prefer a 10-inch saw or even an 8-inch. The 12-inch, like what this is here in the shop, I think because of the circumference of the blade, it tends to grab a little bit more at the end. So sometimes you get, I don't know if you can see that here. This is a piece I actually cut with it. So it kind of broke this end a little bit. Now I always put the nailing edge upwards. So if it does break, it isn't a huge deal. It isn't down here on the bottom where someone can see it. But I don't seem to have that problem when I use a 10-inch, or I don't have an 8-inch, but I imagine it would be basically the same. But because this 12-inch is what I have right here in the shop, it's just handier to kind of demonstrate how to do it. So really simple. This will make all your straight cuts. You just simply mark where you want to cut. Easy as that. Slide it tight against the fence and make the cut with the saw. So I'll just demonstrate that, but it's really no more difficult than that. Just lower the saw nice and slow. I've heard of people putting the blades in backwards on these saws too. I've never done it, and maybe if on the 12-inch, if I did put the blade in backwards, it would be better, but I generally don't put the blade in backwards. Okay, so easy enough, right? That perfectly makes all your straight cuts. It's pretty tough to do like your angle cuts for a gable with this saw. You might be able to on the sliding. No, yeah, you'll never get it to extend out long enough. So this is great for your straight cuts, but not really useful for any kind of angles. Okay, so that's one of the tools out of the way. So let's just look at the snips, because that's an easy one. So with the snips, same thing. You can easily, mark your line where you need to cut, whether it's on an angle or whatever. It really isn't going to matter. You can do it with the snips. Okay, so I've got my line there. I'm not sure if you can even see it, but I just simply cut it off, right? So I find usually it's easier to work on a bench, because I can kind of manipulate the piece as I get to the profile. Okay, so it doesn't leave as nice of a cut, but if you can arrange your cuts in a way where that's the cut that's hidden by the factory edge on the overlap, not a big deal. I mean, honestly, if you take a little more time than I did, you can make that cut nicely anyways. Okay, so the snips. Now, the grinder. I started using the grinder myself a number of years ago, because normally what I was doing is I was making all my straight cuts with a miter saw or even tin snips, and then on the gable ends of buildings you always had these big long angled cuts, and it was a real pain to do with the snips. Your hands got sore by the end. So then I figured out if I drew a line and just followed the line with my grinder, it was way easier to do. You do get a lot of, and you'll see after I make the cut, because of the plastic bits that come off here and the static, you do end up with a lot of staticky kind of plastic dust, but whatever, it just blows off after anyways. But so same principle. Again, I'll just do a straight cut with the grinder. And again, it's easier to work on some kind of bench where you can hang the piece off the edge, or else have a sacrificial top on it, because you're going to need to grind right through it. So I'll put that just right here so you can kind of see. Now I've got my guard on my grinder, and like I said, I've got just a concrete blade in there. So you can see that works quite well. On this edge here, if this is the piece I was keeping, you sometimes get a little bit of a lip there, or a little bit of a burr there, but usually if you just pick at it with your finger for a couple of minutes, it's gone. So, okay, so the grinder works really well. A lot of times those edges, you might be cutting up into a J channel or whatever anyway, so you're not even going to see that edge. So the grinder works really well. Like I said, well, you can see, probably see just from that little cut I did, how much of that little fine dust you get there. And usually the grinder's pretty covered with it by the time you're done at the end of the day. So now, for this jig, you can actually, if you look in the description, we'll put a link to this cross-cutting jig here. We did a video where we built this entire jig. It did originally have a much shorter fence here. This is actually the original fence. So you can see it was, a little over half the length. When I started using this jig and using it for cutting angle cuts, I realized that this part of the jig right here was just really too short. So we used it on one job, and it kind of got cut right through. So then came back from that job and decided, yeah, I definitely need something longer. So I just made up this jig, and it still fits inside the box of this. So you'll see that in that video, how this jig is made and how all the parts that go with it store inside. Okay, so this jig's really easy for using with your circular saw. This fence is made up to fit my saw so that my saw is guided between these strips, right? So it can simply just stay on track. It's like a track saw, really. Okay, so now again, if I'm wanting to cut a piece of siding here, I can simply just measure my length of siding. With my jig, I can just put a little mark down here on the corner. I can slide my siding in until I basically have a little peephole here where I can see my mark. So I just get it lined up. Now I normally wouldn't take the saw out of there. You can actually see it. I was just trying to show you what I was doing. So I've slid it over. I'm going to hold my siding piece tight to this fence back here, which I've got this and this set to 90 degrees. So I'm making a nice straight cut here, an end cut. And just get my safety gear on. Okay, so I'm ready to go. Okay, so makes a nice, this actually makes probably the nicest cut, this and this. You just get a nice clean cut every time. Now, like I said earlier, I realized once I had this guide made up and started using it that, boy, this thing would be nice for cutting all those gable end angled cuts. So once you know what your gable roof slope is going to be, you can basically just put this fence on the right angle, corresponding angle to whatever your roof is, and then mount it down here as well. So I'm just going to, I think I had a mark here somewhere. Maybe I didn't. It doesn't really matter on my angle because I'm not doing anything particular right now. But so I just screw this guide down to the fence rails again once I have it on the right angle. And originally what I was doing is I was still using this guided area, and I was finding it a little bit hard to see in here without making this hole, my peep hole, any bigger. And I realized on my jig I can simply actually put it out on the side here. Well, that's why I didn't line up with any of my, sorry. I was trying to line it up with this, and that'll be better. So I was cutting a 412 angle before, or earlier with this. So I'm just going to put it back on that angle. It'll obviously be on whatever angle you want. I realized, when I'm cutting in here, it's hard to cut both ends of the angle. But if I use my saw actually out here on this guide, on the edge, I can make both angles without changing the guide around. So if I want, if here's my roof line coming up and I need this end to be angled like that, right? It's the wrong way there, but when I turn it upside down and slide it in, it's going to be the right angle. So I just figured out that by cutting one side upside down, one side the right side up, I can get both my angles without changing the jig around. So we are just going to cut one here quick. Same idea, you just got to hold it in place. And again, on my jig, I'm running it on the outside here, and I've just found that works really good for the angles. I don't have my saw set at the right depth. Got a little bit of smoke there because I was obviously off my line a little bit on where the guide used to be. Whoops, that's my scrap piece. So here would be my end piece. Now it might be much longer than that, but it would follow up underneath the soffit on the gable end. Okay, and it makes a really nice cut. So this jig works really well for that. Now, since we're just talking about cutting siding, I guess I'd be mistaken if I didn't actually mention using an Olfa knife as well. Because a lot of times you want to cut, maybe you want to cut, what's good? Maybe you just need this much of this piece. So I'd mark my line on the back, and I can score it with my Olfa knife and break it off, or use a straight edge or whatever you need to do to make it right. So Olfa knife is another handy tool when cutting vinyl siding, and in fact you might really need a combination of 2 or 3 of these things on certain cuts. When you start cutting around doors and windows and that sorts of thing, you might want to use snips, a knife, and maybe the grinder, right? Okay, so all these items will cut vinyl siding. Like I said, really you could do the whole job with your knife and your snips if you really needed to, if you didn't want to buy these other items. But anyways, those are my favorite ways, or my favorite items to use or tools to use when cutting vinyl siding. And hopefully you enjoyed the video. Check out my other video that shows making this cross-cutting jig. And like I said, we'll leave that in the description below the video here. And also down in the description you'll find links to all our social media, the YouTube channel, forum, all that kind of stuff will be right in the description. And as always, please subscribe, turn on your notifications, and click the thumbs up. Thanks for watching.